Picture the most beautiful building human hands have ever made. Now fill it with 20,000 people who have nowhere to relieve themselves. Add marble floors that have been urinated on so many times the stone itself has absorbed the smell. Add tapestries worth more than entire villages, hanging over corners that courtiers have been quietly using as latrines for decades. Add perfume so thick and expensive it costs more per drop than a farmer earns in a month, sprayed not for luxury, but because the alternative is smelling what's actually underneath. That's Versailles, the palace of the Sun King, the most powerful address in the world. A building so magnificent that foreign ambassadors wept when they saw it for the first time, because nothing in their experience had prepared them for anything so vast, so gold, so deliberately, almost violently beautiful. Also, there is human waste in the stairwells. There are flowers carved from marble on every ceiling and human filth soaking into the baseboards of every corridor, and both of those things are equally, completely true. And understanding how both of those things could exist in the same building at the same time is actually the key to understanding everything about this particular century and this particular court and this particular king. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists staring up at the Hall of Mirrors, not as visitors pausing to read plaques about furniture. We're living it. One day, one person. Everything they would have seen, smelled, touched, and quietly, desperately tried to survive without ruining their reputation forever. So, I make these history stories. Honestly, I don't know if you sleep to them, or if you're all just people who have a complicated relationship with the 17th century, and a lot of questions about French plumbing. Either way, get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Here we go. Your eyes open in darkness, not gentle darkness. The dense, complete darkness of a room with no windows, or rather, with a window so small and so covered in grime that it admits perhaps the suggestion of the idea of light. The darkness of an attic that doesn't belong to you, that you are renting from a man who knows you can't complain because where else would you go? For a moment, you don't know where you are. For a fraction of a second, you're back in Auvergne, in the house where you grew up. The modest manor house that your father's father built and that your father slowly sold off piece by piece to pay debts he never mentioned, and that you only discovered after he died, and you added up the numbers and understood that the inheritance you'd been counting on your entire life had evaporated before you were old enough to inherit it. Then it hits you. The smell. Not one smell. Several. Layered on top of each other like geological strata, each one telling you something about the building you're in, and the city you're in, and the century you're living in. First, the smell of wood that has been cold and damp and cold again too many times. The particular greyness of old timber that never quite dries out. It comes from the floor, the walls, the low ceiling pressing down above you. Second, the smell of the other men sleeping in this attic. 4 of them. All minor nobles, all in the same situation as you, which is to say, arrived at Versailles with enough money to dress correctly and not quite enough money to secure one of the actual rooms inside the palace itself. The smell of unwashed men in good coats is a specific thing. There's the starch, faintly sour. There's the pomade that Monsieur de Versailles applies to his hair every morning in quantities you find excessive. There's the warm animal smell of sleeping bodies, which is honest and human and absolutely cannot be allowed to follow you through the doors of the palace. Third, something coming from below, from the courtyard. You've lived in this building for 3 weeks and you still don't know exactly what that smell is, which is perhaps a mercy. And fourth is the reason you are awake. Fourth is you. You need to relieve yourself. This is the problem. This is always the problem. This is the problem that nobody explains before you arrive at the greatest court in the world, which is that the greatest court in the world has no organised system for dealing with the most basic biological function of the 20,000 people who live within its walls. You knew, of course, in the abstract way that you knew things about Versailles before you arrived, that it was grand, that it was vast, that it was the centre of everything. What you did not know, what no one thought to mention in any of the letters of introduction or the advice from your mother's cousin who had spent 6 months here in 1678 and described it in terms of pure gilded wonder, what was somehow omitted from every account you had ever read was the practical reality of 20,000 people, the servants and guards and courtiers and ministers and cooks and laundresses and musicians and dancing masters and dressmakers, 20,000 people with functioning digestive systems and no adequate provision for the results. You lie still for a moment. The straw mattress crinkles under you. The thin blanket is not warm enough, but moving will make it worse, because moving will shift the cold air around, and cold air in December is not your friend when your bladder is making demands. The church in the town is striking something. 4 in the morning maybe, 5. Impossible to tell from here. The bells of Versailles are different from the bells you grew up with. More numerous, more confident. They ring as if they know they're ringing near a king. You wait 30 more seconds, thinking perhaps the urgency will recede. It does not recede. It intensifies with the specific malice of biology. You sit up. The cold hits your face and hands immediately. December at Versailles. The temperature in this attic room is approximately the same as the temperature outside, which is approximately the temperature of a bad decision. Your breath comes out in small white clouds. You locate the chamber pot in the darkness by memory. 2 steps forward, slight turn left. It should be against the wall behind the wooden chest. It is not there. You stand in the dark, in your shirt, in your stocking feet, with the cold floor pressing up through the wool, and you understand that Monsieur de Brézac has moved the chamber pot again. He does this. He moves things and doesn't put them back, and when you mention it, he looks at you with an expression of such authentic confusion that you can't determine whether he's genuinely oblivious or the most infuriating man in the Ile-de-France. You feel along the wall. Your fingers find the rough plaster, cold and slightly damp, the kind of surface that catches under fingernails. You feel the edge of the wooden chest, the hinge of it, the cold brass that stings your fingertip like something alive. There, around the other side of the chest, the chamber pot, ceramic and cold, exactly as useful as it was before Brézac moved it, and exactly as insufficient for the needs of 4 grown men. You use it. The sound of it in the silence of the attic is an entire small humiliation. All 4 of the others are asleep around you, and you are aware of this even though they almost certainly cannot hear you, and even if they could, they are in the same situation every morning and have no standing to judge. When you are done, you stand in the dark, holding the chamber pot, and think about what comes next. What comes next is that you have to empty this. At Versailles, emptying the chamber pot means carrying it downstairs and either finding one of the designated waste disposal areas in the courtyard, assuming you can locate it in the dark, assuming someone hasn't filled it already, assuming you don't run into someone you know in the corridor while carrying an obviously full chamber pot, which would be the kind of thing that gets mentioned quietly at the wrong moment and follows you for longer than you can afford, or simply adding it to the growing deposit in the corner of the stairwell landing that everyone pretends not to notice. You choose the stairwell landing. You're not proud of this. You're also not willing to navigate 3 flights of dark stairs in your shirt at 4 in the morning in December to demonstrate virtue that no one will see. You set the pot back where you found it. Then you stand in the dark and you think about the day ahead. Today, if your information is correct, and your information comes from the other minor nobles in this attic who've been here longer than you, and therefore have the kind of knowledge that can only be accumulated by surviving small failures over time, today is a day when the morning hunt goes out from the Cour Royale at 9. Today, if you position yourself correctly, you might actually be in the correct corridor at the correct moment to be seen by someone who matters, which means today you need to be perfect, which means today you cannot afford to be human in any of the ways that human bodies insist on being. Let me explain something about Versailles that the paintings don't include. Versailles was designed. Every single element of it was designed, and the design was the point. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who had his likeness carved into approximately every surface that would hold still long enough. Louis XIV understood that power was not just about having power, it was about being seen to have power, constantly, continuously, by as many people as possible. So he built a palace that was designed to display him. Every room, every corridor, every garden was arranged around the problem of making Louis visible and making that visibility feel inevitable, like the sun. He was always at the centre. Everything else orbited. He moved to Versailles in 1682. Before that, the French court had been at the Louvre, at Fontainebleau, at various chateaux around Paris, mobile, dispersed, manageable. When he moved the court to Versailles, he didn't just move himself. He moved the entire government. Every minister, every secretary, every bureaucratic function of the most powerful country in Europe was relocated to this one building, or to the buildings that clustered around it. And if you wanted access to any of those ministers, any of those secretaries, any of those bureaucratic functions, you had to be there too. So the nobles came, the dukes and the counts and the marquises and the minor lords from every province of France. They came because if you weren't there, you didn't exist. A noble who stayed on his estate managing his lands was invisible. He couldn't ask for favours. He couldn't influence appointments. He couldn't block enemies or advance friends. The entire system of aristocratic life required physical presence at court. Louis knew this. He designed it this way. The golden cage. At its peak, Versailles housed somewhere in the neighbourhood of 20,000 people. The palace itself had around 700 rooms. The mathematics of this doesn't work. The mathematics of this was never meant to work. That was part of the point. High nobility got apartments, actual rooms inside the palace. Small rooms, usually, dark rooms, but rooms, with a fireplace or the right to use a fireplace, with a door that closed. Everyone below a certain rank went somewhere else. A nearby building, a house in the town, an attic above someone's shop, a corner of a servant's room. You paid for the privilege of being close enough to the palace to matter. You're paying 40 livres a month for 4 straw mattresses in an attic that smells of other men's bad decisions. 40 livres. Your father's estate, before the debts consumed it, generated perhaps 300 livres a year in a good year. a poor year, less, which means you are spending per month more than a tenth of what was once considered a reasonable annual income for a family of 3, and you are getting, for that money, approximately the same comfort you would have had sleeping in a barn. But you're here, and being here is the entire point. Dawn comes in stages. First, the darkness goes from absolute to merely heavy. The tiny window begins to suggest grey rather than nothing. Then gradually, grudgingly, the room takes shape. The 4 straw mattresses on the floor, Brezac on his back with his mouth open and his pomaded hair pressed into an increasingly eccentric shape. Chateauroux curled on his side, still wearing his coat because the cold. Little Perregaux, who is 17, and already has the jaded expression of a man twice his age, lying perfectly still with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, doing God knows what in his head. And you, Armand de Villefranche, 22 years old, 3 weeks at Versailles, possessor of a minor title that dates back 200 years and no longer comes with the land that originally justified it, wearer of a coat that cost 90 livres and was absolutely necessary, and has left you with exactly 68 livres to live on until something changes. Something needs to change. The hunt today, Perregaux says, without moving or looking away from the ceiling. I know. Monsieur de Chamfort will be there. He controls 2 positions in the household of the Duc d'Anjou. I know. Are you positioned? I'm working on it. Perregaux finally turns his head and looks at you. He has the particular expression of someone who has been 17 years old at Versailles for long enough to understand that working on it means not yet. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. You start to dress. This takes longer than it should, because dressing correctly at Versailles is not a matter of putting on clothes. It is a matter of constructing a statement. Every element of what you wear communicates something specific about who you are, where you rank, how much money you have, and how much you understand the language of this place. The shirt first. White linen, changed yesterday, which puts you ahead of several people you know. This smell of clean linen against your skin is one of the day's first small pleasures. It won't last. Then the breeches, dark grey, good quality. The knee bands slightly worn, but not visibly so unless you're looking. The stockings, white, carefully rolled. A ladder in a stocking at Versailles is not a wardrobe malfunction. It is information. Information about your circumstances that you would prefer remained private. The waistcoat, gold thread on cream silk. This is your one genuinely good piece. Your mother's cousin left it to him in a will, and it passed through 2 other hands before reaching you. But it fits reasonably well, and in the right light it looks like money. The coat, dark blue, cut fashionably. The buttons are brass, not silver, but they're polished to a shine that makes the distinction less obvious. The wig. God, the wig! The wig is a construction of horsehair and human hair. You've decided not to investigate the proportions. About 30 centimetres at its tallest point. Powdered white, slightly stiff from yesterday's powder, which means this morning you need to repowder it, which means you need the powder, which is in the small box under your mattress, which means moving the mattress, which wakes Brezac, who makes a sound like a man being informed of bad news in his sleep. You powder the wig. The powder rises in a small pale cloud, settles on your coat, on the floor, on Brezac's face. Brezac sneezes without waking up. You settle the wig on your head. Check the mirror. The mirror is cracked diagonally, which gives your reflection a faintly bifurcated quality, but you can see enough. You look like a minor nobleman at Versailles, which is exactly what you are. The question is whether you can look for the next 14 hours like a minor nobleman who is going somewhere. The first problem of the morning announces itself as you're putting on your shoes. Your shoes are tight. You know why your shoes are tight. You walked 3 miles yesterday in them, through corridors and courtyards, and your feet have decided to remember this by expanding slightly in the night. The left shoe in particular has a seam at the outer edge that was borderline acceptable last week, and is this morning beginning to deliver specific opinions about the ball of your left foot. You lace them up anyway. You have no other shoes suitable for palace floors. The stairs down from the attic are dark and smell of what the stairs smell of at Versailles, which is to say they smell of the collective nightly decisions of approximately 40 people who all found the stairs more convenient than the courtyard latrines in the dark. You hold your breath for the first flight and breathe shallowly after that. The landlord, Monsieur Fenot, is already up, sitting by the fire in the main room of the ground floor, eating something from a bowl. He looks at you with the expression of a man who has seen enough minor nobles in financial distress to have lost the ability to feel anything about it. "Cold today," he says. "Yes." "Hunt goes out at 9. So I understand. If you're going to stand in the Cour Royale for it, you'll want to leave early. The passage from the Rue du Vieux Versailles is blocked this morning. 2 delivery carts jammed together. You'll have to go around by the stable block." You had not known this. You make a mental note and are freshly grateful for Fenot, who knows everything about the logistical reality of Versailles, the way fishermen know tides, through long experience and a complete lack of romance about it. "Thank you. The coffee is on the fire. Help yourself. I'll add it to the week." The coffee. This is important. Coffee at Versailles in 1685 is a relatively new thing, but it has spread with the specific velocity of things that people urgently need. The nobles at court are drinking coffee to survive the hours of standing and waiting that court life requires. The servants are drinking coffee to survive the hours of work that serving the nobles requires. Everyone is awake too early and staying up too late, and coffee is the mechanism by which this remains possible. Fenot's coffee is thick and bitter and slightly burnt, made in a pot that probably hasn't been cleaned since the Fronde, and it is wonderful. You drink it standing near the fire with both hands around the ceramic cup. The warmth spreads from your palms inward. Your left foot aches. The coffee helps. You eat a piece of bread that Fenot produces from somewhere, hard at the edges, soft enough in the middle, eaten standing because sitting down in your good coat would risk creasing it in ways that would read from a distance as exactly the circumstances that produced them. You eat the bread and drink the coffee and watch the fire and think about Monsieur de Chamfort. Here is what you know about Monsieur de Chamfort. He is 53 years old. He arrived at Versailles in 1672, which means he has been here for 13 years, which means he has absorbed the palace the way walls absorb damp. He controls, through a combination of personal relationships and bureaucratic positioning, 2 minor positions in the household of the Duc d'Anjou. Minor positions meaning not the kind of positions that directly affect policy or wealth, but the kind of positions that place you inside the orbit of a man who does affect policy and wealth, which at Versailles is the intermediate step between nothing and something. Chamfort hunts. He goes out with the royal hunt 3 times a week when the weather permits and once a week when it doesn't. He rides well. He drinks reasonably. He laughs at the right moments. He is, you have been told, approachable, but only if approached correctly. And correctly at Versailles is a word that contains multitudes. Your method of approach has been developing for 3 weeks. It consists so far of making sure you are visible in corridors where Chamfort walks, standing in positions where he might notice you without you appearing to need him to notice you, and waiting. You've been told this can take months. You don't have months. You have 68 livres. The hunt today, the Cour Royale, the great courtyard in front of the palace, fills with horses and dogs and huntsmen and courtiers, and the controlled chaos of the king's departure for the forest. The king himself will ride out, and around him the tightly organized swarm of his household and his favourites, and the men who have managed to position themselves close enough to be part of the picture without being presumptuous about it. You are going to stand in the right place. That's the entire plan. Stand in the right place at the right moment, so that Chamfort either notices you or can be noticed at by you in a way that leads to some form of introduction. You finish the bread. You put down the coffee cup. You look at Fenot. Thank you for the warning about the passage. He waves his spoon without looking up from his bowl. You go out into the cold. December in Versailles. The town of Versailles has grown up around the palace the way barnacles grow on a ship. Not planned, not elegant, but persistent and increasingly difficult to remove. It is full of the people that a palace of 20,000 requires. Tradespeople, suppliers, landlords like Fenot, apothecaries, barbers, tailors who specialize in the kind of emergency repairs that come from a day at court, restaurants and coffee houses where the minor nobility and the upper servants meet and exchange information about who is rising and who is falling. The street is cold and wet. The cobblestones are slick. The sky is the specific colour of French December that suggests more grey is coming, and the grey that's already here has no plans to leave. Your breath makes small white clouds. Your shoes, your expensive, too tight, increasingly opinionated shoes, click on the cobblestones. The smell of the town in the morning is horses and wood smoke and something cooking somewhere. Bread, probably. And underneath all of that, the smell of a town that is too large for its sanitation to handle. Versailles, and the town has this quality. So does Versailles, the palace. The entire project of Versailles, palace, town, gardens, everything, exists in a permanent negotiation between the extraordinary human effort required to maintain the appearance and the equally extraordinary human effort required to deal with the biological reality of the people maintaining it. You go around the stable block as Fenot suggested. The sound of horses is audible before you turn the corner. That particular combination of hoof strikes on stone, the tack and harness sounds, the low urgent conversation of grooms. The stables at Versailles are, architecturally, more impressive than anything you had in Auvergne. The stable block is 1/2 mile long. It houses 1,500 horses. The smell is extraordinary. Hay and manure and warm animal and leather oil, a smell so honest and industrial that it's almost a relief after the complex perfumes of the palace. The grooms are busy. The hunt horses are being readied. You can see them through the archway as you pass. Large animals, restless with early morning energy, their breath steaming in the cold air. Grooms in brown livery moving between them, checking girths, adjusting bits. A horse stamps and its iron shoe rings on the stone like a bell. You walk quickly, not hurrying. Hurrying at Versailles reads as either desperation or lateness, and both of those are things you want to avoid, but with purpose, which is different from hurrying in ways that are important and legible to people who understand how these things work. The main courtyard of the palace comes into view, and here, as always, is the moment where everything you are stops for a second. The palace. In 17 years of construction, employing tens of thousands of workers, spending approximately 100 million livres in the currency of the day, an amount so staggering it was considered by people who had to think about it professionally to be something like financially catastrophic. Louis XIV built a building that exists to this day as a fairly reasonable answer to the question, what would it look like if you decided to make a building that was simply a statement? The statement is, I have this much power and I want you to know it. The facade stretches 670 meters. 670 meters. Which means if you stood at one end and started walking toward the other, you would be walking for over 6 minutes before you reached it at a brisk pace. The building is so wide that the human eye at ground level cannot actually see the full extent of it without turning. You have to track it. It refuses to be contained in a single glance. The stone is pale. At this hour, in the winter morning light, it's not quite gold. The gold comes later, when the sun is higher, but it has a quality of captured light, as if the stone itself remembers being warm and is thinking about being warm again. The windows. In a period when glass was expensive enough, the window tax was a meaningful revenue source. The palace at Versailles has hundreds of windows, enormous windows, floor to ceiling in the main rooms, and the effect of all of that glass in the facade is something that artists of the period struggled to capture, which is that the building appears to be simultaneously solid and dissolving, stone and light alternating so rapidly that your eye can't settle. The men who built this were workers from all over France, hundreds of them dying in the process. The swamps around Versailles bred fever, and the fever was efficient, and they built it anyway, year after year, until it was done. You know all of this. You've known it since childhood. But knowing it and standing in the courtyard at 6 a.m. in December, with your left foot hurting and your stomach not entirely settled, are two different experiences, and standing here still does something to you that knowing it did not. You look at it for perhaps 15 seconds, then you square your shoulders, adjust your wig, and walk into the current of people streaming toward the palace doors, because the hunt goes out at 9 and Chamfort will be in the Cour Royale, and you have 3 hours to find the correct position. The interior of the palace in the early morning is its own world. Outside, cold, grey, honest. Inside, warm, gilded, performative. The servants are already everywhere. At this hour, before the court has properly woken, the palace belongs to the people who make it work. Chambermaids moving with armloads of linen, valets carrying hot water in ceramic pitchers, a man pushing a cart loaded with wood for the fires, the wheels chattering on the marble floors, leaving tiny tracks of bark and sawdust that another man with a brush is following close behind to remove. The floors of Versailles are marble. Marble is cold and hard, and in winter the chill rises through it. Even when the air above has been warmed by fires, you feel it through the soles of your shoes, which are leather-soled and approximately as effective as paper against the cold from below. Your left foot, already having its opinions about today, receives this information and incorporates it. The smell of the palace in the morning is many things at once. The beeswax that has been used to polish the floors. You can see the finish on the marble, the particular sheen that comes from real wax and genuine effort. The wood smoke from the fires that are being lit throughout the building. The ghostly smell of yesterday's fires and the present smell of new ones. The food from the kitchens somewhere distant, something being roasted, something being boiled, bread baking, the warm fungal smell of rising dough, and underneath all of that, persistent, ancient, embedded in the building itself, the other smell, the smell of 20,000 people. You know, by this point, where not to walk if you want to avoid the worst of it. Certain stairwells, certain corridor sections, certain alcoves that have been, through some combination of convenience and habit, informally designated. You knew none of this when you arrived, and your first week was an education in the specific architecture of where people go when they have nowhere proper to go. The official latrines, the lieux d'aisance, the places of ease, which is a phrase that deserves some examination in terms of the gap between its name and its reality, are scattered through the palace in numbers entirely inadequate for the population. 274, by the count of one unfortunate official who was asked to inventory them. 274 for 20,000 people. You do not need to be a mathematician to understand the problem this creates. What happens in practice is that the overflow goes elsewhere. In the gardens, in the courtyards, in the stairwells, behind the tapestries, in the corners of rooms during gatherings when leaving would be impossible, or would require explanations that people don't want to give. There is apparently a particular corridor on the north wing, near the apartments of the secondary household, that by about 2 in the afternoon on any busy day has achieved atmospheric conditions that cause some visitors to quietly reverse direction and find another route. You have been in that corridor. You reverse direction. What you understand now, 3 weeks in, is that everyone knows about this. The king knows about it. The ministers know about it. The architects who built the palace knew about it, or should have known about it, and somehow the decision was made that magnificence was more important than plumbing, and here you are. There are edicts. Periodically, royal edicts are issued requiring that waste be disposed of only in designated areas. The edicts are issued regularly enough that you can determine their effectiveness by the fact that they keep needing to be reissued. You pass through the Hall of Battles, currently serving as a corridor between wings rather than the gallery it will become later. The paintings on the walls are enormous. Battle scenes, mounted heroes, the long triumphant history of France reduced to a series of golden moments, and below them, at about knee height, there is a smell in the corner by the second window that you do not investigate. Into the Salon de l'Abondance, small by palace standards, decorated in the style that means this room is important, but not the most important room. Marble pilasters, gilt cornices, a painted ceiling depicting abundance, the allegorical figure presiding over abundance. A large fireplace with a fire in it. The room is warm. You stand near the fire for a moment, letting the feeling return to your hands. 2 other courtiers are here already. You recognize one of them. The Viscount de Sancerre, 30-something, a minor position in the Ministry of Finances that he has held for 8 years without advancing or declining, which at Versailles is called stability but also has another name. He nods at you. You nod back. Conversation at 6 in the morning is not required. You are all, in your different ways, doing the same thing. Warming yourselves, positioning yourselves, being present. Here is the part nobody wrote home about. The lever du roi, the king's rising. Every morning, Louis XIV was ceremonially awakened in a process that began around 7:30 and involved approximately 150 people. And if you understand one thing about how Versailles worked, understand this. Attendance at the lever was not just an honour, It was a function. It was the mechanism by which Louis assessed his court, distributed favour, and reminded everyone, every single morning, that their position in the world depended entirely on his. You didn't have to be there, but not being there was noticed. The king's chamber was in the centre of the main wing. Approaching it required navigating a sequence of antechambers, each one representing a step up in the hierarchy of who was allowed to be there, each one physically smaller and more valuable as you moved inward. The outer antechamber, anyone who had managed to get into the palace at all. The inner antechambers, those with positions in the household, or those invited by those with positions. The chambre, the actual bedroom, for those with specific titles and specific standing, for the blood royal, for the highest nobility, for the men who actually handed Louis his shirt. The shirt, this is the thing. At the lever, the king's dressing was a ceremony. Every element of it had an assigned role, an assigned person, an assigned hierarchy. The king's first valet prepared the shirt. The shirt was handed by the gentleman of the chamber. If a prince of the blood was present, he handed it. If not, a duke. If not, a count. If not, a lesser noble. The honour was determined by rank and presence, and the honour of handing Louis XIV his shirt was one of the most coveted small moments at the court, because Louis noticed everything, and the people who had been there, who had handed him the shirt or received his shirt or even stood in the room where the shirt was handed, those people the king knew, he remembered. And being remembered by the king was the only currency at Versailles that didn't devalue. You don't have the rank to be in the chambre. You're in the outer antechamber with perhaps 60 other people, standing in the warmth and the candlelight and the specific silence of men and women performing the act of waiting with the appearance of patience they mostly don't feel. The outer antechamber smells of candle wax and powder and expensive perfume. 6 different expensive perfumes layered over each other in a way that becomes its own smell. A court smell. The olfactory signature of concentrated human ambition and beeswax and recently applied powder. Underneath that, the sour note of wool coats that were last properly aired in November. And underneath that, the older smell of the room itself, which is of a room used by many people for many years, in which the ventilation is secondary to the aesthetics. You stand near the door, not too near. Too near reads as eager, and eager is almost as bad as desperate, but visible, available to be seen. There is a technique to this. You're still learning it. The courtiers who have been here for years have developed a kind of presence without effort, a quality of being exactly as visible as required while appearing to need nothing from anyone. It's a performance of non-performance. You're not there yet. What you have, which some of them have lost, is the ability to be genuinely interested. 3 weeks in, this palace still does things to your attention that years of familiarity have probably smoothed away for people like Sancerre. The faces here, the complexity of the light in the antechamber, candles and the growing grey from the windows competing and creating a particular kind of illumination that painters have been trying to capture for 20 years with varying success. The way sound moves in high-ceilinged marble rooms, voices travelling differently than they do in smaller spaces, conversations acquiring a slightly formal quality just from the acoustics. You look interested because you are interested. Chamfer is not in the outer antechamber. You learn this by scanning the room carefully in the first 5 minutes, checking each face the way you've learned to check faces, not staring, not making it obvious, a kind of peripheral inventory. Chamfer has a specific physical presence, broad shoulders, a particular way of standing that suggests a man who's been on horseback since childhood. He's not here. He is in the inner antechamber, which means he has more standing than you do, which you already knew, and which means you cannot reach him here, which you also already knew, and which means the hunt is still your best opportunity, which you already knew. You stand in the outer antechamber and you wait. Time moves differently at Versailles. This is one of the things Perregaux tried to explain to you in the first week, and you didn't fully believe him, and now you do. Time at Versailles is organised around the king. The king wakes, and the court wakes. The king hunts, and the court hunts, or prepares to be available when the king returns. The king dines, and the court attends. The king is entertained, and the court provides or observes the entertainment. Everything exists in relation to that centre point. For someone with a position, an actual role in the household, an actual function, this gives the day a structure. You have a thing to do, and a time to do it, and a place to be. For someone without a position, for someone in the outer antechamber at 6:30 in the morning with 68 leaves and a tight left shoe, time at Versailles is a vast unstructured expanse that must be navigated with the appearance of purpose without any actual purpose, and the navigation is exhausting in a way that physical labour is not. Physical labour tires the body. This tires something deeper. You stand, you observe, you make yourself available. Around you, the other courtiers are doing the same thing with varying degrees of refinement. A woman in a blue silk gown with a stomacher heavy with gold embroidery stands near the tapestry, her face arranged in an expression of pleasant neutrality that has probably taken her years to achieve. She is talking quietly with another woman. The conversation has the particular quality of conversations in antechambers, which is that it contains the surface content, something about a marquise's dress, and underneath it, running simultaneously, the actual content, which is information about who is currently in favour and who is not, and what that means for anyone connected to them. A young man, maybe 20, nervous in a way he's not quite hiding, feet shifting, eyes moving too quickly, stands near the window. New, a few weeks at most. The nervousness is legible from across the room. You recognise yourself in him. You try not to look too long. The lever concludes around 8. You hear it more than see it. A shift in the energy of the building, a direction to the movement. The doors between the antechambers opened. People begin to move with purpose. The king has risen. The day has officially begun. Louis XIV is 46 years old in 1685. He has been king for 22 years in his own right, since he wrested control from his ministers and decided to rule personally, and before that king in name for longer. He had been constructing Versailles for 17 years. He is in excellent health, rides every day weather permitting, eats prodigiously. His eating habits are a subject of court legend. His sister-in-law described watching him eat 4 plates of soup, a whole pheasant, a partridge, a large slice of ham, a salad, 2 generous slices of mutton, garlic, and assorted pastries in a single meal, but more on that later, and manages his court with a combination of personal charisma and institutional structure that has made him the most powerful monarch in Europe. He is, by all accounts, charming when he wants to be, cold when he needs to be, capable of genuine kindness, and equally capable of the kind of quiet cruelty that comes from never having been told no. He is also, this morning, about to go hunting. The Cour Royale fills slowly. The hunt is not a secret. Every morning that the weather permits, the king goes out. The horses are prepared from before dawn. You pass the evidence of this on your way in, the grooms, the steam from warm animals in cold air. The dogs are kennelled separately over at the Grand Commune, but you can hear them this morning carrying faintly on the still air. Hounds that have been bred for this specific work, that know what the sound of horses being readied means, that are expressing their opinion about it. The Cour Royale is surrounded on 3 sides by the wings of the palace, and the 4th side opens to the town. It's a space designed for exactly this kind of display. Enough room for horses and riders and all the people who will watch them, with the palace backdrop making everything that happens in it look like a painting of itself. You position yourself. The left side of the courtyard, close enough to the route that the hunt party will take when they move toward the park gates, visible from the main body of courtiers but not pressed into the crowd. There are maybe 300 people here already, more arriving. The hunt draws an audience not because watching horses leave through a gate is intrinsically interesting, but because the king is involved, and anything the king is involved in is where the court needs to be. The horses are something. The royal horses of Versailles are the product of the same program of controlled excellence that produced everything else at this court. They are mostly bred from Spanish and Barb stock, tall and well-muscled, dark in the mane with a few greys. They move with the particular alertness of trained animals that know what's coming. Heads up, ears forward, small dancing movements under their riders. They are expensive in ways that horses don't normally get to be expensive. The tack is worked leather. The saddles embroidered in places that would be invisible once the rider mounted. The smell of them from 20 meters is good. Warm and animal and clean, the smell of well-kept horses that have been groomed this morning and are not at the moment, contributing to the general sanitation problem. The sound of them is the sound of iron-shod hooves on stone courtyard, each step a small percussion. And when a horse shifts its weight or stamps or turns, the sound multiplies. You scan the crowd for Chamfort. There, far side of the courtyard, talking with 2 other men, both of whom you don't know well enough to use as intermediaries. He's wearing dark green today, a riding coat, boots to the knee. He looks comfortable here in a way that means he's been comfortable here for a long time. He is 30 meters away. In 30 meters of courtyard is 20,000 livres worth of social architecture. Who stands where? Who talks to whom? Who can be seen approaching whom without that approach looking like exactly what it is? You work your way around the edge of the courtyard. Not directly toward him, directly would be obvious, but in a general drift that takes you along the south wall, past a cluster of household officials, past a woman you've seen twice before who looks through you the way expensive people look through people they can't use. The king comes out, and here is the thing about that. When Louis XIV enters a space, the space reorganizes, not metaphorically, literally. Everyone in the Cour Royale turns, and the turn moves through the crowd like a wave, heads rotating in sequence from nearest to farthest, creating a visible ripple of attention. Then the stillness, and within that stillness the sound of the horses increasing in frequency as they feel the attention around them. A dog somewhere near the kennels begins a long, low calling note. The king is on horseback before you see him clearly. The horse beneath him is grey, close to white, 17 hands at least, moving with the steady confidence of an animal that has done this 1,000 times. Louis is in burgundy today, a riding coat with gold buttons, a cocked hat with a white feather. He rides correctly, of course he does, upright and balanced, hands easy on the reins. He's not large in person. This surprises some people. The paintings make him larger. But on horseback he has a quality of stillness that reads as size. A man so certain of his position that he doesn't need to take up extra space to occupy the space he has. He says something to the man riding beside him, not looking at him, looking ahead, but clearly speaking. The man nods. The hunt party forms around him. And here is the problem. In the space of about 3 minutes, while the hunt party is forming, and the courtiers in the Cour Royale are all focused on the extraordinary centre of the scene, while 300 people are absolutely looking the other way. Your body makes a decision, not a polite request, not a suggestion, a decision. You need to relieve yourself, right now. Not in the way you needed to at 4 this morning, which was urgent but manageable. Right now, with the cold and the standing and the coffee from Fenot and the bread, and apparently the particular cruelty of cold December air, your digestive system has decided that the appropriate response to the most important 30 seconds of your day so far is to immediately require your complete and undivided attention. You stand very still. You're 20 meters from Chamfort, who is watching the king, who's about to depart. The hunt will be organized in the next 5 minutes. After that, the window closes, and the next opportunity will be whenever you can get close enough again. You stand very still and try to negotiate with your own body. Your body is not interested in the negotiation. The cold is not helping. Cold, for reasons you understand in theory but wish you didn't understand in practice, accelerates certain biological processes. Your breath is coming out in small white clouds. Your feet are cold on the marble. Your left shoe is conducting a separate and entirely unrelated campaign against the outer edge of your foot. 3 minutes. If you leave now, if you actually go to find a retreat or a corner or any of the informal solutions that Versailles offers, you lose the position. You lose the moment. Chamfort will move with the hunt to the park, and the next hours will be courtyard noise and waiting, and you will be in your attic tonight with 68 livres and no new information. If you stay, you stay. This is the decision that court life at Versailles requires. This is the specific negotiation that every courtier who has ever stood in this courtyard has had to make in some version. At some moment. The body's schedule and the court's schedule do not coordinate. They cannot coordinate. 20,000 people in a building with insufficient facilities, all of them required to be visible at unpredictable moments, all of them in wool and brocade and horsehair wigs in a building that is sometimes too hot and sometimes too cold, and never adequately ventilated, and everyone, absolutely everyone, maintaining the fiction that they are composed, graceful, unhurried, above biological concern. The ladies have a specific solution for this. The bourdaloue, it's a vessel, about this long, shaped like a gravy boat, with an elongated oval opening and a handle, made in porcelain or silver depending on your financial circumstances, small enough to fit in a muff, or up a wide skirt. Women at Versailles carry them. They use them in carriages, in antechambers, behind fans and skirts and the convenient geography of wide petticoats. They use them at the theatre, in church, at long meals where leaving would be noticed. Some of the most beautiful bourdaloue are enamelled and gilded. There is a porcelain industry in France that owes a portion of its existence to the problem of Versailles sanitation. Gentlemen do not, in theory, have an equivalent solution. In practice, gentlemen at Versailles have a range of approaches that they never discuss and mostly deny, which include the strategic pillar, the tapestry corner, the garden hedge, and in extreme cases of well-considered social architecture, the simple declaration that one is retiring briefly to attend to correspondence. You cannot, in the middle of the Cour Royale, with the king present and Chamfort 20 metres away, attend to correspondence. You stand very still, and you concentrate, and you will yourself to exist on a different schedule, and for approximately 4 minutes and 30 seconds, you succeed. The hunt party begins to move. The horses resolve into a column. The dogs, 6 couple of them, you can see them now as they come through the far gate with the huntsmen, add their voices to the sound of the morning, not wild yet contained professional, but eager in a way that reads in their whole bodies, heads up and straining against the leads. The courtiers in the Cour Royale part to create a corridor of space. The king rides through, and around him his companions, and behind them the household cavalry, providing their visual authority to the scene. 20 metres, Chamfort. He's watching the hunt move out. As you move along the edge of the crowd, as the bodies around you shift to watch the departure and create new spaces, you get to 15 metres without anyone noticing you particularly. Then 12, then 10, and Chamfort turns. He turns because someone speaks to him, or he senses movement, or simply because he turns, and for a moment he is looking directly at you. The moment lasts perhaps 2 seconds. 2 seconds is enough. Not for conversation. There's no opportunity for conversation. The hunt is still moving past, and the noise and the movement and the entire protocol of the moment means that any conversation here would be inappropriate and read as desperate. But 2 seconds is enough for something simpler. You nod, slightly, not fully. Not the deep nod of a subordinate acknowledging a superior, but the measured nod of one man acknowledging another man's existence at a shared event. Chamfort looks at you. His expression is the expression of a man trying to place a face. He does not nod back, but he doesn't look away immediately either. He looks at you for just slightly longer than a look requires, which in the economy of Versailles glances means, "I've logged you." Then the last of the hunt party passes and the crowd begins to break apart, and Chamfort turns to speak to one of the men beside him, and the moment is over. You breathe. Your body, which has been waiting with specific urgency for the last 6 minutes, renews its request. You begin walking toward the north wing, where you know the locations of 2 different informal solutions, and you walk with the carefully maintained pace of a man who has somewhere specific to go and is going there, and you do not hurry, and your left shoe hurts. Here is what most accounts of Versailles don't include: the smell. The smell of Versailles in 1685 has been documented by enough foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries that you can reconstruct it with some confidence. The Princess Palatine, Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate, who married Louis's brother Philippe and wrote letters about everything with the frank specificity of a woman who had decided that court life was too absurd for tactful omission, wrote about the smell of Versailles in terms that her editors later tried to soften and that historians have been restoring for 300 years. She wrote about urinating in the stairwells, about the corridors where the smell made your eyes water, about courtiers ducking behind hedges in the gardens, and the fact that the gardens at certain hours and in certain sections were primarily being used for a function that the hedges were meant to prevent from being visible. She wrote about it without apparent horror because by the time she wrote about it, it was simply the reality of the place. You adjusted, You learned which routes to take. You carried your perfume, the perfume at Versailles. The perfume is, in part, the response to the smell problem, not solving it. Nothing available in the 17th century is going to solve the smell problem of 20,000 people in an inadequately ventilated building, but managing it, displacing it, creating a competing sensory narrative. The king himself, and this is documented, would sometimes move between his apartments when the smell of his own apartments became too much. This happened with enough regularity that there are official records of apartment changes that historians have connected to what is delicately called sanitation concerns. The gardeners of Versailles had a specific labour. The gardens were divided into sections, and certain sections was designated for public use, and after each major court event, a cleaning crew worked through those sections. They were worked hard. The records of their wages exist, and the volume of their work is implied. And the flowers. Part of why the gardens of Versailles are so extraordinarily, almost oppressively full of flowers. The parterres with their elaborate designs, the thousands of orange trees in their silver tubs, the roses, the jasmine, the lavender. Part of why the gardens smell so deliberately, so densely floral, is that the alternative was smelling what they were covering. This is not romantic. It is practical. It is the 17th century solving a problem with the tools it had available, which were flowers and perfume and enough wealth to buy both in industrial quantities. The north wing, specifically the corridor between the second and third stairwells, has a specific corner behind a tapestry depicting the triumph of Neptune that by this point in the morning has been visited by at least 6 people before you and will be visited by many more before the day is done. This is not polite to think about, and you don't think about it. You simply use the corner and don't think about it and move on. The tapestry is wool and silk, deep blues and greens, Neptune on his chariot, seahorses and tritons. It must be 20 feet high. It probably cost several thousand livres. It has been hanging in this corridor for 15 years, and in that time has acquired, at its lower edge, in the 12 inches between its hem and the floor, a history that Neptune himself might find objectionable. You straighten your coat. You don't look at the base of the tapestry. You walk away with the pace and the expression of a man returning from a specific and legitimate errand, which is, in its way, exactly what you are. The morning opens into itself. The hunt is gone. The king, Chamfort, the horses, the dogs, the sound and colour and drama of it. And the Cour Royale settles back into its ordinary purpose, which is being the space that separates the palace from the town, and through which the business of the day flows in both directions. You have 3 things to do before noon. 1. Confirm the information about Chamfort's routine that Perregaux gave you. Specifically, you need to know whether he returns to the inner apartments for the midday dinner, or whether on hunt days he eats separately with the hunt party at the forest pavilion. 2. Identify the correct location for being present when the king's hunt returns. This is later, possibly around 2, possibly 3, depending on the weather and the game. The return is another opportunity. Different energy from the departure, the king returning, the horses tired and the men easy with the day's exercise, but potentially a better moment for a brief exchange. 3. And this is less a task than a condition. Maintain the appearance of someone with business and purpose and sufficient standing to be walking these corridors for approximately 6 more hours on 68 livres and a hurting left foot. The midday dinner at Versailles is called the Grand Couvert. This is the moment that requires explanation, because the Grand Couvert is one of the most specifically, almost defiantly, strange things about Louis XIV's court, and it connects directly to the problem we started with this morning. The King of France ate in public, not sometimes, not for special occasions, every day. Once a day, often at noon, sometimes in the evening, Louis XIV sat at his table, alone or nearly alone, and ate a full meal while the court watched. Watched, meaning stood, around the edges of the room, standing, observing. Not eating themselves, that was not the point. The point was witnessing, affirming, being present while the king was present. This is theatre, specific intentional designed theatre in which the king's biological need to consume food becomes a ceremony of power. The act of eating, private and animal and human, becomes a public performance. Because in the world Louis XIV had constructed, there was no act of his that was allowed to be private. There was no moment of weakness permitted. Everything was a demonstration of majesty, including lunch. The service, silver vessels, multiple courses, each dish carried by a procession of servants and presented with ritual formality. The king's first gentleman serving him. The tasting protocols for poison prevention, which continued throughout his reign even when the practical threat was minimal, because the ritual itself served a purpose beyond its stated function. Around the room, the court, standing, watching. You've attended the Grand Couvert twice. You will attend it today. Not because there's a formal requirement, but because not attending is noticed, and being noticed not attending is information you don't want distributed. The Grand Couvert happens in the antechamber of the king's apartments. The room is large and decorated and has fires and candles, and the specific temperature of a room in which heat and cold have reached a negotiated settlement that satisfies neither. You will stand for somewhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours while the king eats. And here is the secondary problem. It is 11 in the morning. You've had bread and coffee since 4. You've been standing and walking on cold marble floors for 5 hours. You are, without question, hungry. And you will stand in the antechamber and watch the king eat an elaborate multiple-course meal, and you will not eat anything, and when it is over you will have the rest of the afternoon before the evening begins, and you will need to find something to eat, because you cannot afford to be light-headed and inattentive at the moments that matter. This is the body's negotiation with the court. The body needs food on a regular schedule. The court needs you at irregular intervals. The two requirements are managed through money. If you have enough, you can afford the town's restaurants and the palace's informal food vendors, and through the particular sustained attention that court life requires, the ability to track your physical state enough to manage it without ever acknowledging it. You are managing yours. Just. The morning has its texture. Between the departure of the hunt and the Grand Couvert at noon, you walk. This is not purposeless. Walking the corridors of Versailles is its own information gathering. You see who is where, who is speaking with whom, which rooms are occupied and by whom. This is not gossip exactly. Gossip implies frivolity. And there is nothing frivolous about information at Versailles. Information here is the medium of power. Who has the king's favour this week? Which minister is in the ascendant? Which family connection is worth cultivating? The gallery above the north wing. You walk it because it's warm, because there are fewer people, because the windows here give a view over the orangery. The extraordinary sunken garden where the orange trees overwinter in their monumental wooden boxes, the trees themselves enormous, planted 60 years ago in some cases, brought from all over Europe, representing what appears to be an obsession with orange trees that is perhaps the most specific architectural eccentricity of the entire palace. There are 3,000 orange trees at Versailles. In summer they stand in their silver tubs in the open air, filling the garden with smell. In winter they shelter here in the long gallery that Jules Ardouin Mansart built for them specifically, because the king likes orange trees and the king has the resources to build a building the size of a cathedral to house them in winter. The smell of the orangerie in December is the smell of green growing things in cold air, leaf oil and soil, and the particular clean smell of plants that are dormant but alive, waiting for warmth. Against the background smell of the palace, it's extraordinary, almost shocking. You stand near the window and breathe it. Beside you, unexpectedly, a voice. You are at the departure this morning. You turn. The man is older, 60 perhaps, with a face like the map of a long and complicated country. Grey wig, a coat that was once excellent and has descended through various stages of use into a settled old age. He is looking out the window at the orangerie with the expression of a man who's been looking at this particular view for a long time and still doesn't mind it. I was. You're careful. You don't know him. I noticed you looking at Chamfort. A beat. You wait. He's not going to see you unless he has a reason to, the man says, still looking at the orangerie. That's not an insult, it's just how he works. He needs a reason. The reason is usually information. What kind of information? The kind he doesn't already have. The man turns and looks at you properly for the first time. You're from Auvergne. It's not a question. Something about your voice, or your coat, or some combination. Yes, sir. Villefranche, is it? I knew your father. He says this without any particular emotion. He had a good eye for horses, less good eye for cards. Yes, sir. The man nods. Something has been confirmed or decided. Chamfort's brother-in-law has a property dispute in Auvergne. Something about a water right in the neighbouring estate. It's been going on for years and the lawyers on both sides are getting fat on it. Chamfort finds this annoying. It's costing money and it won't resolve. If you have local knowledge about that region, about the specific people involved, about anything that could help it move, that's your reason. You stand very still. The orangery smell is in the air around you. Who are you, you ask? The man looks mildly amused. Monsieur de Renaud. I had a position in the household of the Duc de Créqui for 12 years. The Duke died in 1687. Or rather, he will die in 1687 if he follows the trajectory I expect. He waves his hand slightly. I've been here a long time. I know things, and I've reached the age where collecting information that I can't use anymore is less interesting than passing it on to someone who might. You study his face. Why me? Because you are looking at Chamfort with the right expression. Not desperate. Interested. There's a difference. He turns back to the window. The water rights case involves a mill on the Allier River, somewhere near Brioude. That's your direction. Close enough. Then you probably know something useful. He pulls his coat more firmly around himself. An old man's gesture against a cold he feels more than you do. The Grand Couvert is at noon today. Chamfort will be there. He usually stands on the south wall, near the third window. After the king rises, there's a moment where people begin to move toward the antechambers, and it's not impolite to be in someone's path. He walks away. His shoes are quiet on the marble. You stand at the window and look at the orangery and think about a water rights dispute on the Allier River, that you know very little about, but more than nothing, because your family's old land was not far from Brioude, and the mill families of that stretch of river were the kind of people your father would drink with at Saint Martin's market, and you spent enough summers riding through that country as a boy to have names and faces and a general sense of who disliked whom and why. It might be nothing, it might be wrong, but Renaud has just handed you a key that might fit a door, and at Versailles a key that might fit a door is worth more than money. The Grand Couvert, the antechamber of the king's apartments at noon. You arrive early, not embarrassingly early, not so early that the servants are still laying the table, but early enough to secure a position on the south wall, near the third window, which is where Renaud said Chamfort stands. The room is already warm, too warm probably. The fires have been going since morning, and the accumulated body heat of a room full of courtiers compounds it. But warm is better than cold, and your feet, after 5 hours on marble, are grateful for it. The smell of the room is food. Whatever is being prepared in the kitchens, several rooms away, travels through the air of the palace with specific persistence. Roasted meat, something, vegetables in butter, bread fresh from the oven, the compound smell of a large and serious meal being constructed. Your stomach makes a quiet observation about this. You ignore it. The room fills. 300 people, possibly more. All of them standing, all of them dressed in their correct attire, all of them performing the same performance of engaged attendance. The hum of conversation is low and specific, not the open volume of a gathering without hierarchy, but the managed volume of people who know that the room has a protagonist who isn't present yet and adjust their behaviour accordingly. Chamfort comes in at 8 minutes to noon. He's with 2 other men. He looks tired in the specific way that Hunt tired looks, a residual alertness in the body, the kind that comes from 2 hours on horseback, but the face is settling back toward its ordinary state. He's changed his coat, a new one, darker, the green traded for a charcoal grey, and the boots are gone, replaced by shoes. He takes his position near the third window. You're 3 meters to his right. The angle is good. The light from the window is behind him. The king enters. The room goes still in the way that rooms go still when kings enter them, which is different from rooms going still for other reasons. It's not silence. There is still the creak of floorboards and the sound of breathing and the small sounds of 300 bodies redistributing their weight slightly. But the air changes. The attention in the room becomes singular. Louis XIV in the middle of the day is different from Louis XIV in the morning courtyard. In the courtyard he was motion and purpose, the hunter thing in front of him. Here he is stillness and ceremony. He moves to his chair, a chair that is more throne than chair, higher backed, more elaborate, and sits, and the meal begins. The service is a ceremony that manages to be both extremely formal and extremely efficient. The dishes arrive at intervals, each one presented by the appropriate officer, each one received with the correct gestures. Louis eats without apparent self-consciousness, which is its own performance. A man who has eaten in public his entire adult life, and has therefore resolved whatever residual humanness might have made it strange. He is simply eating. The court is simply watching. And here is where the strangeness of it becomes visible. The king is eating. He is eating with appetite and precision, a man in good health who's been riding for 2 hours and is genuinely hungry. He eats a soup first, then a fish, then meat, then more meat, eating steadily and apparently with enjoyment, cutting the Meet himself with a knife that has a specific handle and a blade that has a specific provenance, drinking from a crystal glass that a servant fills and carries to him on a salver, never setting it down within reach. The glasses never touch the table at the Grand Couvert. They're always carried and held and returned, because the table is sacred in ways that include its uncluttered surface, and around him, 300 people who have not eaten since early morning, standing in a warm room full of the smell of food, watching. The human body's relationship with the smell of food is involuntary. Your mouth is doing things without your instruction. The amount of focused self-control required to stand in this room, looking pleasant and engaged without letting any of the physiological responses your body is having become visible in your face. This is a skill. You are practicing it. You're not at this particular moment excellent at it. Your left shoe has entered a new phase of its campaign. The ball of your left foot has a spot roughly the size of a coin where the seam of the shoe has been making its argument all morning, and has now reached the point of making that argument in a language that includes a small, specific, consistent pain, not severe, annoying in the specific way that small, persistent things are annoying, which is that you can't ignore it completely, and the part of your attention that's not ignoring it is the part you need for Chamfort. You breathe, you stand, you watch the king eat. 45 minutes. The king eats for 45 minutes today, which is on the shorter end of his range. Sometimes it goes over an hour. And when he finishes the last course, when the desserts have been presented and attended to, and the meal is drawing to its conclusion, you feel the room shift. The same shift you felt in the courtyard that morning, but inward. The gathering of energy before dispersal. The king's departure from the table is as ceremonial as his arrival, each element of it attended to by the appropriate officer, and when he finally rises and moves toward the inner apartments, the crowd begins to move. This is the moment. The movement is controlled but real. 300 people beginning to redistribute through the space and into the corridors beyond. It creates a current, a natural flow that brings people together and separates them in patterns that are, in some sense, random, and in another sense entirely predictable. Chamfort moves from the window toward the main door. Your path intersects with his path 3 steps before the door. Not precisely calculated, you're not the only person moving, and the flow of the crowd makes exact positioning impossible, but close enough. You are in his way, or he is in yours, and the moment requires acknowledgement. He looks at you, and you nod. But different from this morning's nod, this one has content. Monsieur de Chamfort, your voice is level, not eager, interested. He slows. He's still placing your face, you can see it. Monsieur Villefranche, Armand de Villefranche. A slight pause. I understand your family has a matter in Auvergne, Brioude district. Something behind his eyes resolves. The look of a man who now knows what cabinet this face belongs in. The Allier Mill, he says. I grew up 6 leagues from there. I know the families involved and the history of that stretch of river back to my grandfather's time. You say this without emphasis, not offering exactly. Noting. Chamfort looks at you for a moment. The flow of the room continues around you. Tomorrow morning, he says, before the lever, the Salon de Diane, the small anteroom, 7 o'clock. He moves past you. The crowd closes. You stand in the antechamber of the king's apartments with the smell of his lunch in the air and your heart doing something irregular in your chest. And you stand there for 3 seconds and think about nothing at all. Then you walk out into the corridor. and you walk with purpose because you have somewhere to be tomorrow at 7 o'clock, and between now and then you have a great deal to learn about brewed water rights. The afternoon opens, your body takes its turn. Food. There is a woman who sells pies from a basket near the stable block entrance, from 11 until 3 most days, the pies wrapped in cloth to keep them warm. The price is 4 sous, which is nothing compared to what you'd spend at one of the town restaurants, and the pies are small and filled, with a combination of things you eat without investigating. You buy 2. You eat them standing outside in the cold, with your back to the palace wall and the pale December sky above you, and they are extraordinary. The pastry is thick and slightly underdone in the centre, which means it's soft where it should be crispy, but the filling is hot and seasoned with pepper and something herbed that you can't identify, and it is, at this moment, one of the best things you've ever eaten. The cold air is clean out here, relative to the interior, very clean. You can feel the difference in your lungs. After a morning in the palace, in the layered smells of the court, the outdoor air has a quality almost like water, something you can register as you breathe it. You eat both pies. You wipe your hands on the cloth they came wrapped in. You look up at the sky. Tonight you need to learn about the Aller River water rights case involving a mill near Brioude, and a dispute that has apparently been running long enough to make lawyers prosperous. Here is what you know. The Aller River runs north through the Auvergne, through country you rode as a boy. The mill families along it have been there for generations. 2 families you remember, the Morans and the Labasses. They'd been in a quiet war about water usage since before your father's time. Something about the seasonal flow and the right to divert water for grinding, and the downstream consequences of that diversion for fishing. The details are fuzzy, but the names are there, the geography is there, the basic shape of the conflict is there. Chamfort's brother-in-law's property. You need to know whose side he's on. Upstream means one set of interests. Downstream means another. You can find this out. In the palace, in the web of information that people like Renaud have been accumulating for decades, this is findable. Renaud. You need to talk to Renaud again. You find him in the Salon de l'Abondance, where he was not this morning but is now, which tells you something about his patterns. He's sitting in one of the chairs near the fire, reading a small book with the concentration of a man who has decided that the afternoon belongs to him and is going to enforce that decision. He looks up when you approach. He doesn't look surprised. The Allier mill, you say? Yes. I need to know which side of the dispute Chamfort's family is on. Renaud puts his book face down on his knee. The brother-in-law is named Sauvage, Pierre Sauvage de Montvilliers. He owns land on the west bank, 2 leagues downstream from Brioude. Fishing rights. He claims the Morin mill, if you know the Morans. I know the Morans. He claims the Morin mill has been diverting water in summer to the degree that the fish don't run past his section of river anymore, and therefore his fishing rights, which he purchased for a substantial amount, are being made worthless. The Morin would say the fish don't run because Sauvage's people overfish the pools above the weir. They do say that. Renaud picks up his book again, then stops. Is that accurate? I don't know. I was 12 the last time I paid attention to this. But the Morin are the kind of family that, yes, probably. There's always been a question about their weir and how they manage it. Renaud nods, something like satisfaction in his face. Chamfort wants the dispute resolved, or reduced. Sauvage writes to him monthly with complaints, and Chamfort finds it tedious. If you can give him anything, A local perspective, a name of a reliable man in Brioude who might serve as an honest assessor, something that moves the situation from complaint generating to possibly resolving. I know the notary in Brioude, or rather my father did, a man named Courtiers. Old family, respected, not connected to either the Morans or the Labasses. Laborier? What? Labasse is a different family. Courtiers is the notary's name. Chamfort's lawyers have been trying to find a local man they can use for an independent assessment, and they haven't been able to find anyone they trust. If you can vouch for Courtiers, I can vouch for him. You're speaking faster now. Or I can tell Chamfort what I know of him, which is that my father used him for the sale of the North Field in, you try to remember, 72, and there was no complaint about it. He's careful. He doesn't take sides. Renaud looks at you for a moment. You have about 40% of what you need, he says, which is more than most people have when they walk through that door. Don't oversell it. Don't pretend you know more than you know. Chamfort is good at detecting invented expertise, and he will use your pretension against you later. He pauses. Be precise about what you know, and honest about what you don't. He respects that. You nod. Thank you, you say. Don't thank me yet. He picks up his book again. Come back in 3 years and tell me how it went. The afternoon is for walking, not aimlessly. With the specific purpose of learning, you walk the Hall of Mirrors. The Hall of Mirrors, the Galerie de Glace, is not yet 10 years old. Completed in 1684, it replaced an open terrace that ran along the garden facade. It is 73 meters long. It has 17 arched mirrors along the inner wall, each one composed of 18 separate glass panels, because French glass makers cannot yet make a single piece of glass large enough for the full arch. The mirrors face 17 arched windows that look out onto the gardens. The effect is what its name suggests, a gallery of light. In the afternoon, with winter sun coming low through the garden windows, the light in the Hall of Mirrors is a specific and extraordinary thing. The sun enters through the windows, strikes the parquet floor, bounces up to the painted ceiling, comes back down to the mirrors, reflects forward and outward and everywhere simultaneously, and fills the 73 meters of the gallery with a quality of light that is both brilliant and somehow interior, as if the light is coming from inside the room itself rather than through the windows. People use the Hall of Mirrors to walk. It's not a room for sitting or gathering, but for movement, for the experience of the space. Courtiers walk here when they want to be seen at maximum advantage. The light is genuinely flattering. The setting is dramatic. The scale is designed to make everyone in it feel like they are part of something larger than themselves. You walk its length and back. The mirrors show you yourself repeated. A young man in a blue coat and cream waistcoat, walking on polished parquet, reflected from 17 angles simultaneously. In the mirrors, the room itself is doubled. 17 windows become 34. The gardens reflected and the actual gardens beyond them layered into a doubled landscape that makes the depth of the space impossible to read correctly. At the far end of the gallery, through the windows, the parterre gardens spread in their formal patterns, the hedges and paths and fountains laid out with the geometric precision that Lenotre brought to them. The fountains are off today. Too cold, the water would freeze in the basins, but the bones of the design are visible, the shapes that in summer are filled with water and spray. Beyond the parterres, the Grand Canal. A body of water dug by hand over 15 years, 1.5 kilometres long, laid out on a precise east-west axis that aligns with the king's apartment windows. The canal glitters in the late afternoon light, lead grey and still, and beyond the canal, the park, the forest of trees, managed and shaped, but still a forest, still large enough to get lost in, where the hunt goes in the mornings, and where, if you are not a minor nobleman 3 weeks at Versailles with 68 livres and a tight left shoe, you might go on a Sunday afternoon to remember that the world is larger than these corridors. You stand at the window for a while. The person you were before Versailles, the boy who rode through the Auvergne with no particular plan beyond inheriting his father's land and living a life of moderate provincial comfort, that person seems very distant from here, from these windows, from this light. This is either where you belong or where you've made a catastrophic mistake, and you won't know which for some time. You turn from the window and walk back down the gallery. Evening at Versailles begins at 7 and doesn't end until the king retires, which on ordinary evenings is around 11, and on evenings with entertainment is later. Between 7 and the king's retirement, the court gathers in the apartments for what Louis has designated the evening's leisure, which takes the form of music, gambling, dancing, and conversation, all happening simultaneously in a series of interconnected rooms. The appartements du roi, in their evening configuration, a series of rooms, each dedicated to a different activity. Cards in the Salon de Mars, music in the Salon de Diane, dancing when there's dancing in the grand rooms, billiards, refreshments. You change your coat at Fenot's. Quickly, Brisac watching from the mattress, with the expression of a man too tired to be envious. Into the evening coat, darker, with better buttons. You repowder the wig. You inspect yourself in the cracked mirror and make the adjustments available to you given the mirror's limitations. You are back in the palace by 7:15. The evening apartments have a different quality from the daytime palace. Warmer, more candles, more bodies, more fires. Louder, the music and the gambling and the conversationy people who have been composed all day and are now composed in a different key, more relaxed, more animated. Brighter, the candles in their chandeliers are the light of celebration, not administration. The gambling rooms are full. Cards are the court's primary evening entertainment. Money moves quickly here. At certain tables the stakes are high enough that a single evening can produce or eliminate wealth in quantities that would be meaningful even at this level of society. The gambling has the quality of organized excitement, focused and controlled, but genuinely tense in ways that other court activities aren't. You don't gamble. You can't afford to gamble. You watch. Watching gambling, watching the faces of the players, this is its own kind of information. Who is easy with money and who is tight with it? Who drinks while they play and who stays sharp? Who has the specific stillness of a good card player and who has the specific restlessness of someone who is playing beyond their means? A woman catches your eye across the card table. She's 40 or so, with a face that reads as having once been and still being quite appealing in a way that includes intelligence. And she's watching the table the way you're watching the table, not as a player, as an observer. She meets your look without embarrassment. She's Renault's type, you realise, the Longa Versailles type, who has learned to read the room from the inside. You don't approach her. Tonight you're careful. Tonight you're holding what you have from this afternoon and not risking it by doing anything that could be read wrong. The music from the Salon de Diane is a continuo arrangement, 2 violins and a theorbo. The melody something you don't recognize, but which has the formal grace of French court music, ordered and complex and designed to create a specific emotional quality that is neither excitement nor relaxation, but something in between, a state of cultured alertness. The evening apartments are also where the other problem of the evening presents itself. You're not the only person who spent the afternoon identifying what they need for tomorrow. 300 other people have been doing the same calculation, and the evening apartments are where those calculations are refined and compared and sometimes tested. At about 9 o'clock you observe the following. Near the billiard table, which Louis plays himself on some evenings, and which is therefore the most prestigious recreational space in the building, a man is attempting to speak with a minister who has been trying to not speak with him for approximately 15 minutes, with the determined patience of a man who has been at this court long enough to know that you never directly dismiss anyone, because direct dismissal creates enemies, and enemies are expensive. The man trying to speak to the minister is young, younger than you. His face has the expression of someone who has arrived at Versailles recently and has not yet understood that the evening apartments are not the place for the conversation he's trying to have. Watching this is educational. The minister eventually produces a smile that is warm and completely empty, and says something that closes the conversation without technically saying anything, and the young man bows and moves away with the face of someone who has been told yes, but has somehow received no, and doesn't know why. You know why. You've watched this enough times now to know why. The evening apartments are not a place for business. They are a place for the performance of leisure, which is itself a form of business, but a different form. And confusing the two is the specific error that marks someone as new. Tomorrow at 7 in the Salon de Diane with Chamfort will be business. Tonight is the management of your presence in a way that supports the possibility of tomorrow. You stand near the music and you listen and you look pleasant, and you do not approach anyone with anything they need to evaluate. At 11, the king withdraws. The coucher, the ceremonial going to bed that mirrors the lever, is not something you observe. It's for the inner court. But the effect of it is felt through the apartments, the same wave of attention that comes when the king arrives, now moving in reverse. The music stops. The gambling tables begin to clear. The conversations that have been sustained by the proximity of the evening start to resolve into goodbyes and departures. By 11:30 the apartments are half empty. By midnight they're down to the diehards, the serious gamblers, a few insomniacs, the servants beginning the night's cleaning. You leave at 11:45. The corridors at midnight are different from the corridors at noon. Quieter, obviously. Dimmer. Fewer candles, lower fires. The staff moving through the spaces that the court has occupied all day, beginning the enormous task of returning everything to the condition that tomorrow will require. The palace at night, with fewer people in it, makes the building more visible. The scale of the corridors, the distance between one wing and another, the absolute certainty in every decorative decision. This cornice, this colour, this pattern of marble on this floor, all chosen with the specific intention of communicating something, and communicating it always, even at midnight when no one is looking. Especially at midnight, perhaps. The message doesn't stop being sent because no one is receiving it. Fenau's, the attic. Brézac is asleep. Châteauroux is asleep. Little Perregaux, the 17-year-old with the ancient face, is lying on his back again, eyes open in the dark. "How was it?" he asks. 7 tomorrow morning, the Salon de Diane. A silence. Then, Chamfort. Yes. Good. A pause. Was it Renaud who connected you? Yes. Don't forget that later. Perregaux's voice is neutral. He doesn't ask for return favours directly. He just expects them to be available when he needs them. People who forget that find themselves with fewer doors open. You lie down on your mattress. The straw is cold at first and warms slowly. What was it, you ask? That he told you. Perregaux is quiet for a long moment. The family of the Marquise de Fontanges. The situation with the royal favour. Another pause. That was 3 years ago. I used it well enough. Then 6 months later, he needed a letter to a man in Lyon corroborated. I corroborated it. The ceiling is dark. You can hear through the thin floor the distant sounds of the town below. A cart on cobblestones, someone's door, a dog. How long have you been here, you ask? 22 months? 22 months. And still in the attic. You do the mathematics of that without pleasure. It moves slowly, Perregaux says, as if reading your thought. Or sometimes it doesn't move at all and then it moves very fast. You just have to be present for the fast part. Your left foot, free from the shoe at last, is conducting its own small celebration. The relief of it, the absence of that seems argument, is physical and immediate. You flex your foot and feel the tight places relax. Sleep, Perregaux says. You try. Sleep at Versailles. It comes in stages, the way it comes when your mind is still processing the day. First, the details. The smell of Chamfort's coat as you stood near him, a wool smell with underneath it something resinous, pine or cedar from a closet. The look on his face when you said the words Alia Mill and watched recognition recalibrate his expression. The specific quality of light in the Hall of Mirrors in the afternoon, the doubled gardens, the long canal. Then, the information. What you know about the Morin family and the Forcalquier notary, and the fish that may or may not run past Sauvage de Montvilliers' property in a good summer. The things you need to confirm in the morning, the things you know well enough to say without qualification, the things you need to hedge appropriately. Then, the bodies. This is the thing about Versailles that you process at night, in the dark, in a way you can't process during the day when you're maintaining the performance of presence. 20,000 people. You were one of them today. You were in the corridors and the antechambers, and the courtyard and the Hall of Mirrors and the gambling rooms and all of the spaces that the palace contains. And you were surrounded at every moment by the evidence of 20,000 lives being lived in extreme proximity, in insufficient space, in a building that was designed to impress and only reluctantly designed to function. The smell, the heat of the antechambers, the cold of the corridors, the marble floors that take warmth and give nothing back. The sound of 300 people standing in a room together, the low continuous texture of that sound, breathing and shifting, and the small sounds of cloth and shoe leather, the corner behind the Neptune tapestry. You think about that for a moment, and then you think about it less, which is what you've learned to do. You don't think about it in the sense of moral evaluation. Everyone does it, or something equivalent, because the alternative is worse. But you don't think about it in the sense of philosophy either. It just is. The palace is what it is. The people in it are what they are. The body is what it is. What this court has constructed is the most elaborate, most beautiful, most formally demanding daily existence in the history of human habitation. And underneath it, persistent and human, and completely indifferent to magnificence, the body goes about its business. The king eats in public. He is watched while he eats. because eating is human, and watching the king eat is meant to transform the human into the royal, to make even the act of consuming food into a ceremony of power. And then the king, after eating, like every other human being who has ever eaten in the history of the species, needs to deal with the consequences of eating. And this happens in the privacy of the inner apartments, attended by specific valets, in a chair called the chaise percée, the pierced chair, a throne with a hole in it and a chamber pot beneath. And this too is ceremony. This too has its protocols, because at Versailles nothing is allowed to be merely human. Nothing except the smells in the stairwells. Those remain stubbornly merely human. You lie in the dark and listen to Brezac breathing, and to the sound of December outside the small window, and to the distant sound of Versailles settling into night. There is a story about the Hall of Mirrors that you've heard since you arrived. When the Sun King was at the height of his power, when France was winning its wars and the court was at its most magnificent, and the palace was newly built and gleaming, he brought the ambassadors of every European power into the Hall of Mirrors for their audiences. They came from Spain, from England, from the German states, from Poland, from Venice, from the Ottoman Empire. They came to acknowledge his power, to negotiate treaties, to present themselves at the centre of the world. And they walked into the Hall of Mirrors, and the light hit them, the doubled light from windows and mirrors, the gold of the decorations, the painted ceiling with its scenes of French military triumph, and several of them, experienced diplomats, men who had seen great courts and great buildings across the continent. Several of them stopped in the entrance and could not speak for a moment, because it was designed for that. Everything about the hall was designed for exactly that response. The light was a weapon. The scale was a weapon. The gold was a weapon. You're not an ambassador. You're a 22-year-old from Auvergne with 68 leaves and a meeting tomorrow at 7 about a water rights dispute on a provincial river. But walking through that gallery this afternoon, the light, the mirrors, the 67 meters of deliberate magnificence, you felt it too. That opening of scale, that moment where your sense of your own proportions temporarily shifts, where you understand that you are very small and this is very large, and the gap between the two is not an accident. There is beauty here that is also a kind of violence. The beauty is so insistent, so designed, so relentless, that it demands a response from you whether you want to give one or not. You gave it one. Standing at the window, looking at the canal, you think about that. Then you stop thinking about it because it's late and cold and you have 7 o'clock tomorrow and you need to sleep. The last sounds of the night. Somewhere in the town, a bell, midnight, or just past. The rhythm of it familiar now, the bells of Versailles that have been, the texture of the last 3 weeks. You've learned to read time by them, roughly, which is something you couldn't do when you arrived. Brezac shifts on his mattress. The straw compresses under him and re-expands with a slow settling sound. Chateauroux, who never speaks after 10 o'clock on principle, makes no sound at all. Périgot, across the room. His breathing has finally slowed. The breath of someone actually asleep. Finally. You wondered sometimes if he slept at all. Your left foot. The seam ache is gone. Just the warmth and the slight looseness of a foot that's been released from its shoe after a long day. The blood moving through it more freely. The small aches that you'll carry for another few days until the leather gives and the shoe becomes wearable again. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, Chamfort, Forcalquier the notary, the Allier River and the families that run their mills beside it, and the fish that do or don't run past the downstream properties in summer. Tomorrow, the possibility that 68 leaves becomes something less than 68 leaves, but that you become something more. Tomorrow, Versailles again. The smell and the cold and the marble floors and the light in the hall of mirrors and the bodies behind the tapestries and the 300 people watching a king eat and the 20,000 people sleeping in every corner of this town tonight, dreaming their various dreams about getting closer to the centre. Here is what will happen to this palace centuries from now. Louis XIV will die in 1715, in this bed, in this palace, after 72 years as king, the longest reign in French history, longer than some people's entire lives. He will die as he lived, in public, surrounded by his court, attended by ceremony. His grandson will move the court back to Paris for a while, because Versailles is expensive and Paris is more comfortable, and the Regency doesn't feel the need for the same level of performance. Then Louis XV will return and stay, and then Louis XVI will be here, and then one autumn night in 1789 a crowd from Paris will march to Versailles. 20,000 people, some estimates say, in one of the extraordinary reversals of history, and the royal family will be taken back to Paris, and the palace will never again be what it was during this century. The revolution will strip it, the furniture, the paintings, the movable wealth of 30 years of royal accumulation dispersed or destroyed. The gardens will grow wild, the fountains will stop, but the building remains. The building cannot be easily destroyed because it is stone and marble and brick, and the bones of it are too solid to take apart quickly, and also because enough people understand, even in the middle of revolutionary upheaval, that you don't burn the Galerie de Glace, that this particular building has become something beyond the politics that created it. 300 years from now, 8 million people a year will walk through these rooms. 8 million. More people in a year than currently live in the entire Kingdom of France. They will stand in the Hall of Mirrors, which you walk today in the winter afternoon light, and they will take photographs with devices that can capture light in a way that the painters of this century couldn't quite achieve. And they will look up at the painted ceilings and look into the mirrors and feel, many of them, something of what the ambassadors felt, the scale, the insistence, the designed magnificence that demands a response. And the floors will still be marble, and the mirrors will still be there, and the gardens restored will smell of flowers in summer, not to cover a smell now, because the sanitation problem has been solved in the 3 centuries between then and this December night, but because the flowers are the bones of the design and the design survives. What the photographs won't show, what the guidebooks mention briefly if at all, is this: the smell of the stairwells, the corner behind the Neptune tapestry, the 274 facilities for 20,000 people, the women with their bordelus tucked into their muffs, the gentlemen behind the hedges in the parterre gardens, the daily negotiation between the most elaborate human ceremony in history and the most stubbornly unchangeable human biology, the history that happens in the Hall of Mirrors, that history gets written. The history that happens behind the Neptune tapestry, that history gets cleaned. But it happened. Every day. The gold and the marble and the mirrors, and also persistently, stubbornly, democratically, the basic biological reality of 20,000 people who needed somewhere to go. Power is the Hall of Mirrors. Humanity is the corner behind the tapestry. Versailles contains both of them. It always will. You're warm enough now, fed enough, safe enough for tonight. You have 68 livres and a meeting tomorrow morning and the name of a notary in Brioude who might help resolve a water rights dispute that has been costing a man in a charcoal grey coat more annoyance than money. It's not much. It is something. The bells of Versailles strike 1 o'clock somewhere in the dark, and the sound of it rolls over the town and through the thin walls of Fenot's building, and up through the floorboards of the attic room where 4 minor noblemen sleep in their expensive coats. You close your eyes. The palace is still there. You know it without seeing it. 670 meters of stone and glass and marble, sitting in the dark, lit by a few watchmen's lanterns at the main gates, the hall of mirrors empty and dark, the mirrors reflecting nothing but the dark from 17 directions. The orange trees in their orangery, green and alive and not yet aware of February. The canal long and still, the surface of it reading the sky, whatever sky there is tonight, clouds or stars or the blue-black nothing of overcast December. 20,000 people sleeping in their various configurations, in the palace itself, in the town, in the attics and the rooms and the stables and the spaces that a place this size finds for the people it requires. All of them, in their sleep, doing the thing that rank and ceremony and constructed magnificence cannot touch. Just breathing, just resting, just being the biological organisms they are, unchanged by the gold on the ceilings, unchanged by the marble under the floors, unchanged by the fact that they live their days at the most deliberately extraordinary address in the world. You are one of them, a boy from Auvergne, a minor title and a good waistcoat and 68 livres, and a left foot that's finally stopped hurting. Tomorrow there will be Chamfort and the Allier River, and the fish that do or don't run in summer past the properties of Sauvage de Montvilliers. Tomorrow there will be the Livre and the Grand Couvert and the long afternoon corridors, and the smell of the stairwells and the smell of the orangerie, and the smell of power, which is a real smell, complicated and expensive. Tomorrow will be Versailles, but that's tomorrow. Right now there is just the darkness and the breathing of 3 other men, and the distant bells and the cold and the thin blanket and the straw mattress and the body that carried you through today, aching slightly in the specific ways that bodies ache at the end of the days they've lived. You've earned this. Let sleep come. Let the palace go dark, all 670 meters of it. Let the mirrors go dark and the marble go quiet, and the 20,000 dreams do what dreams do. Let the body rest that spent the day performing composure, performing ease, performing the fiction that it exists on a different schedule from the one it's actually on. Let the feet be feet. Let the stomach be stomach. Let the whole complicated apparatus of the human body that was underneath the court clothes all day be quietly, privately, briefly what it is. Let the sounds fade. The cart in the street below, the bells, the last voices of the town. Let the smell of the attic, old wood and cold and 4 men in the grey end of the day. Let that be enough. It is enough. It is the honest smell of the night, not the performed smell of the court. And there is a kind of rest in honesty that no amount of orange trees can entirely replace. Some things don't change. The Hall of Mirrors will be stripped and restored and stripped again, and polished by 8 million visitors' admiration. The Neptune tapestry will eventually be moved to a museum, and the corner it guarded will be cleaned and forgotten. The chaise percée of Louis XIV will become an artifact, placed behind glass, labelled in 3 languages. But people will still wake before dawn and need somewhere to go. People will still stand in warm rooms full of the smell of food and feel their bodies quietly negotiating with their circumstances. People will still hold themselves together through the hours that require it and come apart gently in the dark rooms at the end of the day. The human body does not change for palaces. This is not a sad thing. It is, in its way, the most honest thing about all of it. The gold doesn't change it. The marble doesn't change it. The 700 rooms and the 1,500 horses and the 3,000 orange trees, none of it touches the basic fact of the body. The fact that underneath the ceremony and the performance and the powdered wigs and the 4-course lunches eaten in public and the mirrors and the guilt and the music and the gambling and the carefully arranged encounters in antechambers, underneath all of it, the body is always present, always itself, always negotiating the same negotiation with the same limited tools. You lie in your attic in Versailles in December 1685 and you breathe. And centuries from now, in this same town, in different buildings, in different beds, people will lie in the dark and breathe. And the palace will still be there. And the thing the palace was built to do, to make power visible, to make it gold and marble and permanent, that will still be there too. But so will this. The straw mattress and the cold blanket and the aching foot and the 68 livres and the name of a notary who might, if the meeting goes well tomorrow morning, help you become someone who is going somewhere. Both things are true. They were always both true. They will always both be true. That is Versailles. That is this century. That is probably every century. Let it go. Let sleep take you now, gently, the way sleep takes everyone eventually, regardless of the address. The day is done. The body has carried you through it. Tomorrow will come. But right now, only this. The dark. The warmth slowly building. The breathing of the room. The bells in the distance one more time. Their sound coming through the walls and the dark and the 300 years that separate your December from this one. The sound of the bells of Versailles marking time the way they've always marked it. One note, then silence, then rest. Good night.